Good day and welcome to Lesson 7 in our study of the book of Judges. Today we're going to do the middle part of chapter 6 because on the last date we did the first part and we were introduced to this man called Gideon. Now, at this stage of Israeli history, the Israelites, as I mentioned before, were subjugated by the Midians. And the Midianites had Israel under severe subjugation. They overpowered them. They actually took most of what they grew, most of what they had. They were devastating the Israeli society to the point that it says that the Israel people, the children of Israel, made for themselves dens and caves and strongholds in the mountains to get away from the Midianites. And it was during this time that we were introduced to this man Gideon, who was himself one of the ones terrified by the Midianite peoples. We see him firstly threshing wheat in a wine press to hide it from the Midian people. So this is not certainly the picture of a man of courage. And yet the angel called him and said that you were a man of might, that you were someone that the God wanted to talk to and to make you lead the Israelites out of the Midian captivity because you were a man of might. He said in verse 14, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." So, this is the story of Gideon. Now, Gideon had been approached by this prophet or by this angel, and he was being confronted by this personage and being told that he was to lead the Israelites out of their captivity at the hands of the Medians. And he was reluctant to do this. There were 4 things about Gideon that we will see in this passage, and we've already seen. First of all, he was terrified of the Midianites. He was there threshing wheat in a wine press. He was afraid. He was not a man of great courage. And part of what he said was that he said in verse 13, I think it is, 15, he said that he came from a small clan, the weakest clan of Manasseh. The Manasseh tribe, or the Manasseh family, was not a big one. And he said he came from the weakest clan in Manasseh. So he came from a feeble and a weak and feeble type of family. And then he said he was least in my father's house. So of all the people in this family's household, he figured that he was the least. Part of the problem is that, as we see later on, his father was an idol worshiper of the god Baal. And in all of this, because of this perhaps, but in spite of all of this, Gideon was having a great deal of trouble believing what this angel of the Lord was saying to him. So as we get into verse 17, he said, "I know I have found favor in your sight. Then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. Do not depart from me here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you." So he's asking for a sign, and we have a right to ask for signs. If we think that God is telling us to do something, then we have a right. We have a right to ask for some kind of a sign to prove that it is really the Lord doing the asking. And he said he wanted to do a sign. He wanted to have a sign, and he was going to ask the angel to stay there until he brought something out to him. So he went in and prepared a young goat, unleavened bread, from an ephah of flour. So he prepared a meal. Now, in some some books it says this is a very large meal, but it does not say that here in the Bible. It just says a meal of a young goat and of an unleavened bread. And this was in fact a type of sacrifice because it was unleavened. It says in Leviticus 2, verse 21, "No grain offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you shall know no leaven nor any honey in any offering to the Lord made by fire." So this was in fact a type of sacrifice which Gideon was bringing out to this angel of the Lord. And he brought this out, and it said the angel then said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on the rock and pour out the broth." And he did that. So Gideon took this sacrificial type of meal, laid it on the rock, and then the angel put out the end of the staff, touched the meal, and fire rose out of the rock. So what he was doing was in essence showing to Gideon, the same type of miracle that Moses did when he struck the rock and brought out water during their trip to the Promised Land. This was a parody of it. And the angel struck the unleavened bread and the meal and the meat, and fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread, and then the angel disappeared. So this was a sign that Gideon wanted. This is the sign that Gideon asked for, that he was given, that this would be a true request from the Lord to have him lead the Israelites out of their slavery to the Midianites. This was a sign that Gideon asked for and that he wanted and that he received. And then he said, now Gideon perceived that this man, the angel, was the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said, "Alas, Lord God, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." This angel of the Lord is all capitalized, indicating that it is really Christ or God himself. And we have been told, he has been told, he knew that you could not look upon God in the face and live. And this is what he's saying, alas, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. He actually looked upon Jesus in an Old Testament revelation of Christ or God. He saw him face to face, and therefore he was both afraid and worried, because he said, I have seen him face to face. And the Lord said to him, peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die. So Gideon built an altar there and called it, the Lord is Peace. This was an altar that he built for his own personal worship. He was going to worship God. He did worship God by the offering he gave to the angel, but the altar he built to God secondarily. And it says that really what he's trying to illustrate is that if you're going to war, if you're going to fight against the devil or against wicked people, warring against the wicked one is impossible without first worshiping the Holy One. And this is what he was doing, was worshiping the Holy God. So this was the first part of this story, where Gideon had tested, asked for, and received a sign from the angel that he was actually to do what the angel had said, had requested of him, and that it was actually from God himself. Now the problem is that Gideon's father was an idol worshiper, and Gideon lived in his house. And God said, it came to pass that the same night the Lord said to him, take the father's young bull, and take a second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar to Baal that your father had built in the yard. and tear down the wooden image beside it, which apparently was to the goddess Asheroth. So this is what the Lord first asked him to do, was to tear down the false altar to Baal and to the goddess Asheroth. This was the first request that the Lord made of Gideon. And Gideon was not the bravest person, as we've seen. He wasn't the greatest one, and he still had doubts. He still had fears, because he was worried as to what would happen to him if he did such a thing. So he said, he was told to build the altar, tear down the altar to Baal, tear down the wooden image of Asheroth, and then build a proper arrangement, a proper altar to the Lord in proper arrangement. On top of this, take the second bull and make it into a sacrifice, and burn it with the wood of the graven image which he had torn down. Now, as I said, this was the request of the Lord, the first request of the Lord of Gideon. And Gideon was not the bravest person around, and he had fears. So because he feared what his father's company, household, neighbors would do to him, he did this in the middle of the night rather than during the day. But he still did it. He took some servants which were faithful to him and believed in him, and obviously still believed in the God of Israel, and tore down this altar to Baal, tore down the graven image, built an altar properly to the Lord, and did the sacrifice on it. Now, this worked until the morning, until the people who also sacrificed and worshipped Baal found out what had happened. And what he said, that they says that when they found this was cut down and asked who had done it, then they wanted Gideon's father, Joash, to bring Gideon out and punish him for it. They wanted him to bring out your son that he may die, because he has torn down the altar of Baal. Now, Joash worshipped Baal, apparently, but he also apparently still worshipped the God of Israel, because he wasn't fussy about bringing his son out to meet these other people. This was, in a sense, similar to what happened in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, when the people wanted Lot to bring out these strangers, these angels that had come to visit him, to bring them out, and Lot refused to do so. He did offer his daughters in place, but in a sense it was the same type of idea. He refused to bring out Gideon. Joash refused to bring out Gideon, so that the people who worshipped Baal could set upon Gideon and put him to death. And Joash said to those people who were trying to get him to bring Gideon out, he said, if you are pleading on behalf of Baal, why? Because if Baal is your God, if Baal is the God that you believe in, then he should be able to plead for himself. So if something was to be done on behalf of Baal, Baal should do it. And it says, if he is a god, let him plead for himself, because his altar has been torn down. Let Baal plead for himself. If Baal is really a god, let him do something. Let him bring fire down from heaven, or bring something down that would punish Gideon himself, rather than us doing it for him. But this, of course, did not happen. So he said, let Baal plead against him, because he has torn down his altar. So this apparently, this act of Gideon apparently stimulated the Israeli people. When they heard of it, they were empowered. They felt empowered. They felt hope again. Because when all the Midianites and the Amaleks Amalekites and the people of the east gathered in the valley of Jezreel, Gideon, under the Spirit of the Lord, blew the trumpet, and the other people who were with him, who were other tribes, started to gather around with him. The Ebusites. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, and also gathered people behind him, sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. So Gideon was no longer alone. He was no longer just by himself, because the Lord was with him, and because the other people of Israel saw that the Lord was with him, saw that he had performed this one act and had confronted Baal, confronted the gods of Baal, confronted the worshippers of Baal. Then the people of Israel felt empowered, and they felt that they had some hope in the future. And after 7 years of being subjugated by the Midianites, they started to rise up, to come together and find their fighting power again. So in spite of the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east coming against them, now Gideon found allies in other tribes of Manasseh and in other tribes of the Israelites. And this is where the story today ends. Next, we go into the rest of this chapter and follow along Gideon's exploits. So Gideon, a weak person, a person whose parents were idol worshippers, who came from a small tribe, who had a lot of doubts, confronted the angel of the Lord and asked for a sign, and received it because he asked for it. And it shows that we can ask for signs too when we have doubts. But he asked for it and received the sign, and then had the courage to do the one thing, to do one step, which in turn empowered the other people of Israel to fall in behind him and to give a chance to get rid of the Midianite overseers. And this is where the story ends today. But next week we'll carry on further with the story of Gideon in the book of Judges. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.